Politics of British Columbia. The politics of British Columbia involves not only the governance of British Columbia, Canada, and the various political factions that have held or vied for legislative power, but also a number of experiments or attempts at political and electoral reform. History of politics in British Columbia. From BC's start as a province, BC used a mixture of the first-past-the-post elections in single-member districts and multi-member districts where voters cast multiple votes block voting. This was in use except for a small break in the 1950s until the 1980s. Prior to 1903, there were no political parties in British Columbia other than at the federal level. One exception to this was the Nationalist Party, BC First Labour Party, founded in 1894. It elected an MLA in the 1894-1898 provincial election, Robert Macpherson. Sir Richard McBride was the first Premier of British Columbia to declare a party affiliation Conservative Party and institute conventional party/caucus politics. Since party politics were introduced to British Columbia, there have been a number of political parties which have controlled the government for more than 10 years, including the Conservative government of the early 20th century, the interwar Liberal government, the post-war Social Credit Sacred government of W.A.C. Bennett, and following a further brief reign by the New Democratic NDP, another social credit government under his son Bill Bennett, the NDP government of the 1990s, and the BC. During the 1940s, the government was controlled by a coalition of the Liberals and Conservatives. Neither party had the electoral strength to form a majority, so a coalition was used as a means to prevent the BC Cooperative Commonwealth Federation (CCF), the forerunner of the NDP, from taking power. From 1972 to 1975, an NDP government led by Dave Barrett held power but was defeated after a showdown with organized labor. Social Credit was returned to power with a new leader, and the son of the former premier, Bill Bennett, who had been recruited by the party's old guard but brought in a new style of politics. In 1986, the younger Bennett retired from politics. His successor was Bill Vander Zalm. Under his leadership, he and his party became increasingly unpopular. In the face of mounting unpopularity and numerous scandals, the party was defeated by the NDP, who went on to lead the province for the next 10 years. Currently, the province is governed by the NDP under John Horgan. In Western Canada, other than Alberta until 2015, typically politics have featured the CCF or NDP on the left and some other party on the right. The present incarnation of the BC Liberal Party fulfills this role. The BC Liberal Party is neutral federally and derives its membership from the centre to the centre-right. Since its takeover by supporters of Premier Gordon Campbell following the ouster of Gordon Wilson, who led the party from effective oblivion to official opposition in the 1991 general election, many consider it to be effectively a rebirth of the defunct BC Social Credit Party. After the introduction of partisan politics 1903-1952, the Social Credit era 1952-1991, after Social Credit 1991 to present. Electoral reform. Recall and initiative. British Columbia is the only province in Canada with recall election and initiative legislation. These measures applied following the 1991 referendum. Only one recall petition was ever deemed to have had any success, that compelling MLA Paul Rietsma to resign his seat in 1998 hours before he would have been removed from office. Fixed election dates. British Columbia was the first province in Canada to institute fixed election dates. Previously, British Columbia elections were like most parliamentary jurisdictions, which only require an election within a specified period of time, being 5 years in all jurisdictions of Canada. Alternative voting systems. 1950s to the 1980s. By the 1950s, the liberal-conservative coalition had begun to fall apart. One of the last acts of the coalition government was to adopt the alternative voting system, which was implemented for the 1952 general election. Under this system, single-member districts and preferential voting was used. Rather than voting for one candidate by marking an X on their ballots, electors ranked their choices of candidates by placing numbers next to the names of the candidates on the ballot. If a candidate received an absolute simple majority of votes, that candidate would be elected. If not, the candidate with the fewest votes was dropped, and the second choices marked on the candidates' ballots were allocated among the remaining candidates. This procedure was repeated until a candidate received a majority of votes. The result was the election of enough candidates of the new Social Credit Party to form a sacred minority government, with the CCF forming the official opposition. The Liberals were reduced to 4 members in the legislature. The Conservatives, who had changed their name to Progressive Conservative in tandem with their federal counterparts, were reduced to 3. The sacred minority government lasted only 9 months. The alternate voting system was again employed for the ensuing general election. The result was a sacred majority. During this term of office, the Socreds abolished the alternative voting system and returned the province to the traditional voting system, a system that used both single-member districts and multi-member districts elected with a block voting system, both using first-past-the-post system. This mixed multiple-member and single-member district system with block voting was abolished in the 1980s, bringing single-member FPTP into use consistently. First decade of 21st century. In 2004, a citizens' assembly recommended replacing the first-past-the-post system with a single transferable vote system to be implemented in 2009, and a referendum was held on May 17, 2005 to determine if this change should go ahead. The proposal received majority support, 57% of the popular vote, but the government had required 60% to make the proposal binding. A second requirement was a simple majority in 60% of the current ridings, and 77 of the 79 ridings achieved this, far more than the 48 minimum. The close result has provoked further interest in electoral reform. As a result of this, the provincial government promised a second referendum on the issue. The second referendum was held in conjunction with the 2009 general election, but it also failed, garnering just over 39% of voter support.